What's the title of this evening's talk? We titled it a while back.
When your wheel hits a rut.
When your wheel hits a rut, you're on a bicycle and you're going along, everything is fine, and you don't see it, and you hit an irregularity. And if you don't see that, this is just an image that I'm using to try to make I guess, kind of a point. If you don't see that, it doesn't matter how good of a bike rider, how much you prepared, how good your bike is, how good the weather is, how great your intentions are about where you're going, what you're doing, why you're doing this. The point I'm trying to make is that causes and conditions, the conditions that arise are just completely without, you just can't predict them. I'm not saying there aren't a few people who claim to predict things. Of course, there are. Meteorologists, they predict stuff. Often inaccurately. So what I'm saying is, no matter what you do, no matter, as they say, the best laid plans don't always work. So even planning itself is a little difficult to plan in such a way that you've covered all of your, all of the possibilities and all the variabilities that are happening. So what is that?
Someone's calling a cat.
Pardon me?
Someone's calling a cat or an animal.
Over here?
Yeah.
Someone's
Next
calling
door.
a cat.
Battle Creek static.
Battle Creek cat. Okay, that's usually not that loud over there. So, what I'm trying to emphasize is what I'm always trying to emphasize. Any of you who have listened to me talk about meditation, this is something I've been practicing for several decades. And I'm highly motivated to not to convert you to Buddhism or get you to practice what I'm practicing or even be a student of mine particularly. But what I am encouraging you to do is do something that you actually have a little bit of say-so over, that you actually can increase or strengthen, and that is your awareness. Your awareness, the actual space in which various things occur, just like we have our sixth sense fields, like the meditation instruction this evening was just receive whatever comes through the sense of touch, sense of taste, sense of smell, seeing, hearing, and even thinking. Whatever's arising, don't add anything to it. By doing this, our awareness or the sense of what it is that's occurring becomes a lot stronger. That becomes it becomes stronger in such a way that you might not necessarily save you from a rut in the road. This is based on something that just happened recently out near where Unyo and I live. There's a highway that we live on where someone, a very skilled and practiced bike rider who'd been around, was a doctor who'd been around for a while, been practicing, was riding up to Lansing, and simultaneously when he hit a rut in where the irregularity in the pavement, he was on the tarmac at off to the shoulder of the road, and at the same time he hit that, it actually twisted his wheel, and I wasn't there, but the way it sounds, he went down into the roadway, and at exactly the same time a van came by and he lost his life, and it was driven by a young 15-year-old person who had a learner's permit. So, but someone investigated that and found that there was no blame. An accident investigator came in. So Usually you can find somebody to blame, but it's like the perfect example of something he hit. The timing was such, it could have been any number of increments. It could have been 2 seconds off would have been different. He would have gone down sooner and they could have swerved more or something. So it's a very interesting area to look at, the timing of things, the unfortunate confluence of two particular cycles. Someone, no pun intended, someone's cycling up to see a ball game in Lansing, going 30 some miles away, 40 miles away, and someone else out driving in their van with I think he was with his mother and so on. Very tragic. And the reason I was using this basically is to say that we don't know what is going to come together in your life, but the more awareness you can bring to any given situation, the more, I'm not saying that if he had been more aware, he necessarily would have seen the rut. But maybe it's possible. He was a bike rider. It's possible that just a little bit of some kind of assuming there's a road, you make an assumption, you're on the bike. This is not to blame anyone, but there's a tendency to take things for granted, we look at it, it looks okay, and you're not actually looking at where your wheel is headed. So you're not actually there. All it would take would be a couple of flashes into your imagination or your memory about what someone said to you that day. You know how we often, you're doing something like doing the dishes and you're having an imaginary, either a conversation that you've already had or you're rehearsing something you're going to have. You're going over, how do I know about that? I do that. That's how I know. It's not like someone told me they do that, and I still do that, even though many years of practicing meditation have gone by. So there's no guarantee that suddenly you're going to be this wonderfully aware person who always sees all the ruts and always and never is doing dishes and accidentally gets a cut because you're daydreaming about something. The other way that this works is in our interactions with others. Sometimes the presumption about that smooth road ahead of us, or the presumption that things are going a certain way, when actually they are not. If you were to look at them very closely and be a little bit more tentative about your assumptions, you might see that there's some irregularities there that need to be brought into your and included in whatever process or whatever activity that you're involved in. And I'm sure we could all think of experiences where we've jumped to a conclusion about something that really wasn't true and then acted on that as if, well, that's what was happening. And then find out later when we're allowed to see more clearly what was going on there, that we really were off on that. Shoka.
It seems like often when there's the intensity of emotion that comes with hitting a rut or being in a rut,
Yes.
that there's a strong grasping to what you see as that's it.
Yeah.
How do you look at that situation to see what's true?
So I think it's necessary to how do you see what is true when you're spontaneously or jumping to a conclusion about something, or grasping at something, or thinking this is happening, or this is happening, or this is not happening. It seems to be necessary to bring as much awareness to that situation as possible. And as I said previously, there's no guarantee that, well, now that I'm meditating, I'm much more clear about this or about that. There's really no guarantee about it. And the causes and conditions, again, that manifest just as a living being. Take anyone in here. Look at all the things that have happened to you since you were born. All of the experiences you've had that have slowly modified or are still modifying how you function, how you relate to people. If you're a person that was treated very with a lot of disrespect when you were young, in some way, it's difficult to not have that affect you in some way. The conditioning that arises, and so the idea is awareness, as much awareness as possible to that. And of course, the way we do it, and the image I often use is just, if you've got another image that you would like to suggest, I'd be happy to adopt it. But the one I often use is a knife that you would cut vegetables with. If you equated with cutting vegetables with thinking or processing or analyzing or functioning in a way to deal with your situation intellectually, emotionally, conceptually, and deal with all the stories that are coming and going in our own minds, along with the stories that are coming and going with the people in our environment and our family, our coworkers, and so on. It's just a complete community of coming and going and assuming and rejecting and accepting and valuing and devaluing that is going on all the time. And the awareness, if the awareness itself, that which sees, that which hears, that which thinks, is really strong, then the process of hearing, thinking, smelling, tasting, touching is less likely to be filled with presumptions and preconceptions. And those preconceptions and presumptions, the way that those gather a head of steam and tend to work to keep us from seeing how to really function in our relationships in an uplifted and sane sort of way, quite often are based on hope and fear. And also can be based on pride, on not wanting to look like you're failing or losing or wrong or something. So you will crank up something that makes it look like you really weren't wrong. You were really just doing what you needed to do. So going back to the idea of the cutting vegetables, the idea is take some time out of your life instead of getting up in the morning and cutting vegetables all day long. In other words, thinking, processing, judging, evaluating, pushing, pulling, getting something, getting rid of something, ignoring something, passion, aggression, and ignorance. Those are the three poisons as taught in Buddhism. Instead, you could include some just sharpen the blade alone, pull the blade back away from those, pull the awareness back away from the thought patterns somewhat. I'm not going to abandon thoughts or abandon smell, taste, touch, and all of the other senses. We're not going to abandon that, but we're going to be we're going to keep that awareness very simple. It's just smelling, not what you're smelling, just thinking, not what you're thinking about, not whether the thinking is right or wrong. Just let the thoughts, so if the thoughts just arise, do nothing with them. If you do anything to the thoughts, then you're actually meddling with your own mind based on what? Hope and fear. Hope that you're going to get better. It's like gambling. I hope this is a lucky number. When what's being suggested is using that same image, get that blade of awareness when you come in and sit down on the cushion. And if you're sitting there and you feel like this is a totally useless thing to do, I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. Well, you're not. Imagine how a knife feels, that it's just totally enjoying chopping radishes, chopping celery, cutting. A knife feels pretty useless when it's just running over the top of a stone, sharpening. Another image. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. But this, the reason I'm using this is when you sit, if you're feeling slightly bored and slightly useless, and like you may be wasting your time from the point of view of vegetables, you are. But from the point of view of really sharp awareness or a really sharp blade, and you go back to actually think about something, look at a situation, much more difficult to what? Much more difficult to, this is key, deceive yourself. Because this is what we're all doing. How do I know? You know how I know. And what does it mean to deceive yourself? You think some things are true that are not. And your reason you think that they're true or feel that they're true is because they serve your self-centeredness a little bit more than what actually is the case does. What actually is the case might not paint such a pretty picture of your past 15 minutes. Very necessary. I'm sorry to give you such bad news. But it's very necessary to strengthen that awareness, and so that we can see very clearly for ourselves what is true. This is not Buddhism, at least the way I understand it over the last number of years and have been taught, and the way I understand it myself from doing this practice, is not about believing something, nor is it about disbelieving something. It's about being very, very aware and clear of what's happening here and what's happening out here, so that you can function in a way that is much more dance-like and much less war-like. Have you noticed how we're always kind of at war? I know I am. If I was dancing all the time, I wouldn't be here. Questions?
So
Cammy?
If you're sitting
Yes, if you're sitting.
and you're, just kind of doing this, you're sitting and
You're sitting.
trying to be aware of, and sitting, and you do that, and
You're sitting and you're aware. Okay.
and you're trying, yeah, and I mean, is it really imperative that you talk to someone about, that you get some, like, if you're just doing this by yourself and you're just,
What's your question?
How important is it to go over, see if you're doing that right, if what's going on is maybe not good for you, not what you're supposed to be doing because it's making you crazier? Is it important to talk to somebody and
Is that your question?
figure out if it's making you
No,
worse?
is that your question?
Yeah, that'd be it.
Yes.
And just figure it out. Okay.
No, there's nothing to figure out.
Okay.
Figuring out is more about ego. It's not that we can't figure something out. If you have a flat tire, and I usually figure it out by calling AAA. That's how I figure out flat tires. I don't know how you guys do it. So a little bit of figuring, a little bit of it, but it's you want to watch that you don't jump into that so far that you end up with you're more confused and you're kind of getting off on your figuring. So it must be working. I'm putting so much energy into this. Quite often we talk to ourselves and say, well, I've tried so hard and I've tried so hard. It's just not working. And so, yes, it's good to, the only thing, this particular instruction is very simple. Sit down, hold still, have all the senses open, and watch what moves. So I'll say it one more time. Sit down, hold still. Use this what's called a mudra, a hand position, just because it's not something we ever do casually. Left over right with the thumb slightly touching. Hold very still and do it for an hour a day. And whatever arises in any of the sense fields, in particular the mind, whatever arises, and this is the challenging part. Don't do anything with it. It's like just like the example I used in the meditation instruction this evening is clouds are none of your business. I mean, you might enjoy a cloud or hate a cloud. I doubt you're going to hate a cloud, but you might. If it was a rain cloud and you're on a picnic, you might dislike the cloud a little bit and take it kind of personally. But generally, we don't really blame clouds for too much. Once in a while, a cloud will just look like it's at fault, but probably not. And so I'm using that. That's why I use that as an example. Take the same attitude that you would towards clouds and move that attitude onto the cushion. You're sitting there, and take that attitude towards your thoughts just while you're sitting. When you get up, do whatever you want. When you get up, blame everybody. So, and that's like saying when you get through sharpening the knife, chop your little heart out. Well, no, chop your heart out. That doesn't work. Chop vegetables. Chop, so in other words, go ahead and use that awareness and go ahead and think and process and even figure out. But while you're on the cushion, simple as possible, how this feels, how this smells, how this tastes, how this sounds, how this looks, how this feels, and how this thinks. Very, very simple. It's like, if you're doing it correctly, when I say correctly, I'm saying following the example I'm setting forth, which relatively correct, you'll probably get bored. It might take a while. You might be really entertained by your own crazy ideas and thoughts and hopes and wishes and so on. It takes a while. It certainly took me a while. So it takes a while to just settle down and just be present and be what sometimes is referred to as the now. Just be in the present moment. How many people are in the present? Usually we're off thinking about the future, regretting the past, or wishing it was still 1956. Nobody here wishes it was 1956. But maybe, yes. What was your name again?
Olivia.
Olivia. Okay, Olivia, what's your question?
So by doing this, you're
Yes.
less likely to deceive yourself.
Yes. Yeah, you heard what I said. Yeah. You're less likely, and the reason you would be less likely to, there's no guarantee, but you'd be less likely to, because it's just like you've turned up the lights in the room. And up until this time, you've been living in a kind of a cloudy room with lots of racket going on and distractions. And so what you've done is you've taken some time out of this crazy, distracted room you've been living in, and you found a dry, quiet, relatively speaking, corner, and you sit down and you just strengthen that which experiences through all those six sense fields. There's a consciousness that arises as receiving smell, receiving sights, receiving hearing, receiving touch, receiving thoughts, receiving memories, on and on and on. And so what we're doing is we're sitting down and we're just, we're strengthening a kind of an invisible muscle that sees. And it's not necessarily to become a Buddhist, although that's what the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago. And the reason that I was even able to receive this is because of Buddhist teachers. If it hadn't been for them, this lineage would probably die out. Maybe not, but it needs some kind of a form. So we have the Buddha, we have our chants, we have places to sit. We have a building, a monastery. It's dedicated to that, so people can come here and spend a good part of their lives sharpening that blade of awareness, so that when they go out into work into the everyday world, they might not be saints, but they're probably creating less of a nuisance to the world than they were, and probably less of a nuisance to themselves. My teacher, Chung Rinpoche, used to say, and I have to paraphrase him because I can't remember exactly what he said, but he says, you may not attain enlightenment, but you'll be less of a nuisance in the world. So I thought that was pretty good. Yes, Sheldon.
Well, sometimes it seems like we got some things going on that are pretty distracting in our lives.
Right.
And so when we're sitting, our mind can be pretty busy.
It can.
So how do you not do anything with that?
Just see that it's busy. If you actually see that it's busy and you don't name it busy, then it's just, you're just aware of what's happening. As soon as you name it, you leave it, because it's like you actually stop looking at it and you start looking at the concept of busy, and you might even start the thing that usually follows that is, why am I busy? And or if that doesn't come up, then I shouldn't be so busy, or how can I stop being busy, or how can busy be helpful? I could go on and on, and probably you could too. But to just see the busyness and do nothing with it is just like seeing a lot of clouds swirling around. You don't blame the clouds for being clouds. The whole idea of praise and blame is well, the fancy word for it is bullshit. And I use that because it's a strong way of saying that going against and refuting something that is commonly accepted everywhere in the world with billions of people, that somebody's to blame for everything and somebody gets credit for everything. And I'm not saying that there isn't some of that, but it's so overwhelmingly blaming and so overwhelmingly praising that it's all out of whack. A little bit of that would be okay. A little bit of appreciating that someone does well, or a little bit of saying, you could have worked with that situation a little bit differently by not opening your big mouth when you did. That word? Yes, sir. Sheldon's kind of has a time delay. Sheldon's goes like this, and then you say call on him, and then there's kind of a pause where the thoughts are really way down there because he's really old. I can say that because I'm old enough to be his dad. Then the thoughts start slowly working their way to the surface, and then they start to get up, and then next thing you know, they're hooked up to his vocal cords, and then you hear a Sheldon sound, which we're about to hear. Then it'll be your turn. Yes.
If you have that thought process going on where you're thinking about something,
Yes.
It seems like that could be kind of stressful in itself, that that you can't stop thinking about something.
Yes.
So will observing, just looking at that, just watching that in meditation, will that calm that down?
So there's your question is pretty conceptual, but you're pointing to something that is experiential in meditation practice. And I would say there's no guarantee of it, but I would say generally, if you do a lot of it, if you find a lot of time to sit down in front of a wall, hold still, and just observe, that nothing lasts. And especially the things that don't last, or the things that go away the quickest, are the things that have no fuel. And those things get their fuel from being objected to. Anytime you object to something, it hangs around and fights with you. And anytime you agree with something, quite often it thinks it's important. And so it kind of hangs around because just to characterize it that way. And quite often something that is running on its own steam that really needs to be looked at and seen for what it is getting its fuel from someplace else, called ignorance. That's the hardest one to see. And there's no way you can point this out to somebody else. All you can do is encourage people to see this, encourage people to wake up and try to live a sane, uplifted life by seeing initially how we continue to deceive ourselves and go back down into difficult areas. Or, so look at it a lot, sit a lot. Since you
mentioned deception happening.
Yes.
When you said something like this, when self-centeredness is being served more than perhaps what's going on, what actually is happening.
Yes.
how do we know if we're serving self-centeredness?
I understand your question and I understand your motivation for the question, but I think we have to actually step into the awareness and be willing to not really know. There needs to be a willingness to let go of all of that energy situation happening that is trying not to be self-centered. Because there's a lot of time can be spent trying not to be self-centered when really what needs to be seen is you're self-centered. Don't try to change that. I'm not necessarily saying, and I realize I talk out of both sides of my mouth all the time.
Okay.
And that's very, did you hear me talk on the other side of my mouth? I do that all the time. And the reason, and this is going to be very, very difficult for students because they want me to function a certain way so it will further their particular idea of what they should be doing. So people get really, really frustrated with that. My mission, you could say, is to fundamentally help you. And I have no strategy for doing that other than to be as straight arrow with you as I can. So I may at one time say, don't be so self-centered, or look how self-centered you are. And another time I might say, I might not say anything like that and see your self-centeredness, but another time I might know that you're going to have to see that. Do you follow me a little bit on that or not? If you have more of a question, there's more there if you want to bring it out. Please.
So if we don't fight with our self-centeredness,
Yeah. Will we feel better?
no. If we stop fighting with it, is there such thing as feeding it? Or
If you're not fighting it, if you're not trying to get rid of it, and you're not trying to justify it, and you're not looking away from it, then it's just it's glaring headlights. And then it's when it starts to die out, and that can be difficult because it feels like we're dying. When you're identified with self-centeredness, see what I'm saying a little bit? It's painful. So it's not about getting rid of self-centeredness. It's about seeing it, and then whatever occurs will be likely less self-centeredness. Or Betty, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Am I understanding you in terms of there's a difference between thinking and being lost in your thoughts and observing your thoughts?
You could be observing your thoughts in any of those situations. The important thing to do there, and it's not something you can actually do. You can't actually do this, but what you're actually doing is you're withdrawing your meddling your hands from the situation. So that's why we hold very still. We cannot find the mind, and I often say, I can't find mine. Can you find yours? We can't find our minds. There's a mind. We all agree to that, but you can't actually locate that. But we can find the body, and the body and mind are not really as separate as they might look. So by holding the body very still, we get more and more aware of what the mind's actually doing. And your mind you may have little flashes where you realize you were just lost in thought. That's awareness. You may have an awareness that you were pushing your thoughts down. That's still awareness. You may have thoughts that you were agreeing with your thoughts or disagreeing or anything. It doesn't matter. Awareness is awareness is awareness. It doesn't make any difference too much what you do with it, as long as you see what you do with it, as long as you're aware of it. And then it will find its own, like I said, when I was talking about the rut in the road, the causes and conditions are so impossible to track. You can't, most people are trying to live their life by getting control of the causes and conditions, get a good education. I'm not saying that's wrong. Don't marry an alcoholic. Maybe I'm going too far there. Probably should. You see what I'm saying? I mean, on the other hand, you could say, well, I want to do that because I want the experience of doing that. You can make up a story about anything. And so what I would say is the most important thing you can do, and when we talk about working with thoughts, is just observe them. And it can take years to understand what that really means. Just watching what comes and goes, what comes and goes, what comes and goes. Has that been helpful, what I said?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you don't have to be a person who doesn't meddle with their mind, you just have to see that you're doing that. Yes.
Questions from 3 different people. The first one from William Murray. What is a Dharma gate, and how does a person know if they pass through one?
So the vow is Dharma gates are without number. Lots of ways of saying that, endless. A Dharma gate, it could be anything. It could be your own personal Dharma gate. It could be your own personal way of working with. It could be your own confusion. It could be your own presumptions about things. Dharma just means truth or law or reality. And a gate just means a way to enter into that. So Dharma gates are without number or numberless. So they're everything you do when let's say if you're functioning in a particular situation and suddenly you get really jealous of someone who you're living with or working with that's really not treating you so well or taking advantage of you or getting more credit than you think they should or credit that you think you should be getting. Dharma gate, because it's actually showing you how reactive and how you want things to be your way. You want them to go your way, not their way. So it could be a Dharma gate. So what was the question again?
How does a person know if they pass through one?
So the idea of passing through one or not passing through it is not so important. If you think you've passed through it, you probably haven't. It wouldn't be. It's a gate, and there is a passing through, but not exactly like we think of. Well, I passed that. Well, that's first grade, second grade, third grade, or first level, second level, third level, fourth level. It's not kind of a linear situation. Something to really reflect on. Just because, William, because you're asking the question, it would be, a good thing to contemplate in your own practice, in your own. Maybe find a Dharma gate in your own life that having to do with passion, aggression, and ignorance that you personally have difficulty with. It could be resentment, could be something very simple, it could be jealousy, it could be lack of the common word is self-esteem. I usually don't use that, but a lack of feeling like you can do this, you can do this practice. Could be something like that. Could be irritation with things. So, further questions?
Yes, from Chigme up in Traverse.
Chigme. Yes, Chigme.
How can you see a rut coming if you are in the present moment?
Well, you probably can't. I know he wants me to say more about that. What would you say about that, Sokuzan? How can you see a rut if you're present moment? So I'll talk a little bit more about it since he's asking me, right? I don't know if it's so much about seeing the rut so that you can avoid it. I think it's more about understanding that things are coming out of nowhere and are unpredictable. We don't know when we're when causes and conditions are going to take our life in a different direction altogether. We don't know when, like in just to use Lisa's example of Lisa's tree falling on her house. I mean, we've not had that, but Lisa and John had that happen and just changed your life. It's probably your life isn't back together yet, is it? Yeah, still trying to. I mean, so you don't know, and that's kind of like a rut coming. So it's not something you can really necessarily avoid, but and staying in the present moment isn't necessarily something we have to do as a occupation. Like I got to stay in the present. I got to stay in the present moment. It might be more important just to see the way in which you're always off on some tangent somewhere. Your mind's thinking this, thinking that. Just watch your mind. Sometimes I'll say, from here to the parking lot, from here to the, go on a walk and watch what your mind does. By contrast, your mind, your awareness doesn't do much of anything. It's just like a blue sky. It's just an open space in which things come and go. So just watch by contrast what our minds are just incredibly active, pushing, pulling, accepting, rejecting, liking, disliking. There's just one soap opera after the next happening. Yes.
Question from Jim Service up in Travis.
Mm-hmm.
How can we hold ourselves responsible for our actions without entering into praise and blame?
So the responsibility, the way I like to work with that word or talk about it, it's not a blame or it's not a credit or it's not who should take the blame so much. It's if you break that down into the ability to respond. So, and that response may take all kinds of different forms. You're just here and you're not neglecting something. So in that sense, you're responding to it. You're there with that situation. You may find yourself moving into it to change something or adjust something or to help someone or to calm someone down or to feed someone or to feed yourself. But if you're acting out of clarity, then the natural balance that is already completely available will be much more dance-like and much less war-like or much less strategy-like. Like, how can I get ahead? How can I get mine and still look like I'm generous? You guys know what I'm talking about. How can I and not look like a greedy person? So the whole praise and blame idea just needs to be looked at. We don't have to change it. There might still be some praising and blaming going on. I know there certainly is here. I haven't gotten rid of anything. I mean that. I've not gotten myself to some other higher level, but I'm fairly clear what's going on over here and generally what's going on in front of me. Unless someone's blowing smoke. Yes.
From Jim Johnson up in Muskegon.
Yes.
His question, will strengthening our awareness make reacting skillfully to the unexpected rut more likely?
Probably. The example I sometimes use, you can tell where your awareness is at the next time you're in the kitchen and you're buttering a piece of toast and it suddenly slips out of your hand and it lands face down on a dirty floor. Watch what your mind does when that happens. If you immediately start to swear or if you start to blame something like goddamn toast, or I'm never going to let you hold my toast again, hand. We do. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but we're looking for blame rather than actually just be with it and have a realization that you don't have to go so far as to discount it in your mind too and avoid the whole thing by discounting it, but just be with what happens. Hear it hit the floor. Notice that it's the gravity. You're no longer holding up toast anymore. It actually is awareness. And yes, there's a little bit of a sense of humor in that. But you can actually feel whether your tendency is to want to go spit and sputter, especially if you can tell more clearly if there's no one in the room. Because if there's somebody in the room, then you're going to be on your best behavior, right? Because you don't want anybody, did I just say right? Because you don't want someone else thinking that you're not, that you're a completely useless person who can't handle a little piece of toast falling on the floor. You gotta use all kinds of epithets that children aren't supposed to hear. Where is she?
Skate.
Oh, Ruby's not here, so good. Ruby's only 8. She just turned 8, though. So we're at any other questions here in Zendo or out in TV land?
12 people watching.
12. So we have a lot of company out there. We have about 12 people here and 12 people out in the distance. Very good. So no question from Maria?
Well, she has to do it via email.
No, she does. That's right.
Yeah.
Let's see. What would Maria ask? Let's see if I can channel Maria from Toronto. Okay, I got it. Sit more. Meditate more. She'll appreciate that. Any final questions before we close? And dedicate the minute. Thank you very much.
Don't forget our donation boxes in the hallway. They're almost empty.
May goodness penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san shi shi shizon wu sa moko sa moko the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita,